Hello, everyone. Welcome. All right. Well, I think we'll still have people joining us throughout the hour, but in the interest of time, I want to get started right away. I am Helen Siegel, and if you aren't familiar with me, I'm the executive director of One Worcester, the organization for nonprofit excellence, where our focus is on providing pro bono business and DEI consulting, as well as education for the Worcester community and those in Worcester County. So we work with other small nonprofits and large nonprofits to provide support. And we are so excited to be here today with Julie Bowditch. Julie is the executive director for CASA Project Worcester and has extensive experience in fundraising, event management, marketing, communications, and she is most certainly a pillar of the Worcester community. She serves on several local boards and volunteers her time for other businesses. And today she's here to teach us some of her tips and tricks for enhancing promotion through social media marketing, specifically for a nonprofit. She is an absolute pro, and we're so excited to have her here today. Julie, I'm going to let you take it away. I also just want to make a quick note that we will be recording this webinar. So if you feel uncomfortable with that, feel free to just shut your video off. It's really not going anywhere too large. So enjoy.
Thank you, Helen. Hi, everyone. Can everyone hear me okay? Great. Thank you, Helen. It's great to see everyone. It's fun to see some familiar faces, but I also see some new friends. So I'm really excited to be with you today. We have a lot of stuff that I'm eager to talk about. So I'm going to jump right in. But anytime that you need me to slow down, ask a question, alert me to something in the chat, please let me know. I'm going to go ahead and screen share because I have some visuals to just help us out today. Let me know if folks can see the social media screen. Throw me a thumbs up or something. Okay, great. Perfect. I appreciate Helen and One Worcester giving me this opportunity and all of you taking a little bit of time out of your day. I'm Julie Bowditch, as Helen said, the executive director here at CASA Project Worcester County. Our organization advocates for and supports youth in the child welfare system, specifically through the juvenile courts. And I'm also honored to be a member of the board at One Worcester. And I see some of my fellow board members with us today. I believe very deeply in the mission that Helen just shared, and I'm glad that you found us. We're going to talk a little bit more about that in a second, but I hope that you continue to follow along as we have a lot of exciting content coming up. I really would love to get to know each one of you and hear about you and your work, but in the interest of time, I'm going to suggest that we use the chat for that. So please go ahead and drop an introduction in the chat, anything you'd like us to know about you, where you're from, or what your goals are for this and going forward. We probably won't be able to hit all of them today, but we can certainly get started. And I will take some time later on to read through, as I'm really grateful that you're with us. Actually, on that same note, while you're throwing your introductions into the chat, if you're in a place where that's safe, I also wanted this is a new experiment for me, so bear with me. But if you're in a place where you can use your phone and scan that QR code, I thought it might be kind of fun to see where you heard about this today. And, optional participation, obviously. I've never tried using one of these polls before, so we're about to find out how effective it is. And we won't spend too much time with it if it's not working well for folks, but I thought it might be kind of fun to get a sense of where you learned about this session. Your vote is anonymous, not that there's anything spicy that we're sharing anyway. But it's just kind of a fun way to see where folks might have learned about our session today. Um, is that QR code working for people or not? Oh, okay. We have our first vote, uh, which was conveniently social media. Duh. Since that's why we're all here today, that's great. All right, we have a couple of votes. We won't spend too much time, but it is fun to see. Okay, this works. This is cool. If you heard about it somewhere other than social media, which I of course chose because that was our topic of the day, or someone other than a space other than from Helen or myself, I see a lot of votes are going to other. I would love to hear from folks if you don't mind putting in the chat, just kind of help us to learn how our promotions are working, where you did hear about it. I know I had mentioned it in at the chamber session that I presented at last month. And then I know we had been posting on LinkedIn and there had been emails and so forth. It's certainly on the One Worcester website. So if you don't mind, if you selected other, just drop in the chat. You can put it anonymously. I'm not, sorry, not anonymously. You can put it directly to Helen if you don't want to put it in the full group chat, but we would love to learn. But thank you to those who made that work. That was a fun little group project. I'll leave it open, but I think we'll move on just again in the interest of time. But thank you for playing along. And I'm glad to know that feature is something fun. Okay, so I just wanted to sort of set the tone for our time together. I wanted to just acknowledge that it's been a it's been a busy year for everyone. For some of us, it's been a rough year, especially if you're in nonprofit space like I am. And I wanted to just sort of make a collective commitment together that we're holding a safe and respectful space for everyone today. If there's anything that I can do to make this presentation more accessible, please let me know. I know I'm a visual learner myself, so I have visual supports. But other folks may learn other ways. I am a fast talker, so if you don't catch something, ask me to repeat it. And as Helen said, we are recording, and I'm more than happy to share a link to the slides after if you find them valuable. At the same time, please do what you need to do to take care of yourselves. For a lot of us, it's the only quote unquote lunch break we'll get today. So eat if you'd like to. I love seeing your faces. I think it helps make an engaging virtual conversation, but also if you need to have your camera off, whether it's for safety or for multitasking or anything else at all, please know it's totally judgment free. If you need to log off early to get to another meeting or something comes up, it does not hurt my feelings. Just please agree to lie to me and say you got a very important phone call and you were not bored to tears. So on that note, I figured we might just start off. If your day has and week has been anything like me, I spent the day yesterday at the State House talking about Casa's work, and that was busy but exhausting. And I spent the morning at the dentist. That was not fun. So I thought maybe we could take just like a big group deep breath together and take as many as you might enjoy. And hopefully that can set us up for a productive time together. So that brings us to our agenda for the day, which is kind of the opposite of a deep breath, but don't be overwhelmed by it. We're going to touch on a lot of things today. We're going to talk about our goals, our audience, our platforms, creating content, some metrics, evolution, tools and tips. And if we have time at the end, I'm hoping we can create some space for question and answer. So again, I want to be transparent going into this conversation. There's some irony here. Ever since my very first MySpace page, which some of you remember, I have never felt more disenchanted by social media as I do right now, currently. So I want to be totally honest with everyone about that going into this. Those who do follow me personally on social media may have noticed that my engagement has dropped on my personal pages, which is a direct correlation to my overall use of social media. That being said, today we are talking about tools, social media tools for our organizations and our business purposes. So I would urge you to kind of try to keep those things separate and not conflate them. We're going to talk more about that kind of separation later on, but just put a pin in that for now. And I also acknowledge that this is an aggressive agenda. Each topic could be its own conversation or session or course or what have you. So obviously we're just going to have time to touch on each one. I do realize we're moving quickly. We're covering a lot of ground. But if there's enough of an appetite for it, I can't speak for Helen, but I'd be more than happy to kind of pick up where we left off and maybe dig in deeper to some things. Maybe we can send out a survey after, not to make more work, but to hear about what was useful to you, what you might want to learn more about. Again, don't want to make any promises on behalf of One Worcester or Helen, but something that I could offer to continue the conversation either as a group or with individuals. Um, like I said, stop me at any time if you miss something that I said. I do have a lot to share, but also I want it to be valuable in a conversation. So, if you don't see the chat, again, please flag it, or just take yourself off mute and shout my name. It's hard to present and see all of you at the same time, so I apologize. And Helen, thank you. We'll keep an eye as well and help flag anything. So, okay, let's jump right in. Our first topic today is setting goals. So this is really the very beginning. We have to ask ourselves what we're hoping to accomplish. We will take some time today to get into the who, what, where, when, how. But none of that really is very useful unless we ask ourselves, why are we here? Why are we looking to access social media? So uh, we're the Oprah of goals today. You get a goal, everyone gets a goal. I think that we can agree we're drinking from a fire hose of information out there, both information and misinformation in the social media world. So it's hard to stand out, right? It's hard for our organization and our content to stand out. We're also, I'm going to guess that you may find yourself a bit under-resourced. If not, you may not be accessing our free session today. I appreciate you joining us regardless of that situation, but given those factors, I think we just want to be really intentional. Our time is valuable, our energy is valuable, our resources. So let's break down some goals together. So one goal might be your brand or mission awareness. That's the one that usually stands out first, right? To me anyway. Another one might be overall engagement, sharing information with supporters or future supporters, keeping folks engaged who already care about you. And another thing might be recruitment. Maybe you're looking to draw in new donors or volunteers or clients, employees even, ambassadors, what have you. So whatever those goals are, I would say sort of hone in on them, let them be sort of your North Star in this whole process. And also acknowledging that there's intersections in our goals, right? There certainly could be goals that aren't listed here. These are just some that I think can be ones that we frequently encounter. I also added a little happy face there, which is really, I like to think of it as our boss or our board or whoever it might be that we're reporting back to. And when we find that convergence of those goals, I like to think that's where our happy board or boss lives. So next we're going to jump right into our audience. So I would recommend that you spend a little bit of time researching your audience. There's two sort of layers to this, right? We're trying to understand who our target audience is and also where they are. So we're going to talk about those two things kind of hand in hand. I think I would love to wish all of us a million followers on each of our pages, but ultimately, I think the reality is it's kind of comforting to know that might not actually get us closer to our goals, unless you're a nonprofit or your work is global or even national. We're looking for a more sort of dedicated, sort of core engagement audience, and not necessarily looking for those hundreds of thousands or millions. Going viral is beautiful. But again, I'm not so sure it actually brings us closer to our goals in terms of the larger scope of social media, right? So I put this here. This is just all of us searching for our audience, our target audience. I figured we could hop in the mystery machine together and go on the search. So there's a few things to think about when we talk about our audience. We're thinking about geography, like I mentioned, sort of what our service region is or where we're trying to reach. Doesn't mean it's not great to have someone on the West Coast that's following us. That's lovely, right? But they're probably unlikely to be our core target follower or audience. My aunt lives on the West Coast. She's lovely. She likes all of our content, but ultimately she's an advocate for CASA in the Bay Area, right? So she's not going to be able to volunteer at CASA of Worcester County. So another thing to think about is demographics. So that can include things like age, gender, culture, socioeconomics, lots of other demographics that can play a role in folks, how they interact with social media and how they might interact with us. And another thing, of course, is their activities. So who is active in what spaces, and we're actually going to segue right into that next. So now that we
Julie, I have actually a quick question on this topic. This is Echo. Hi, nice to see you.
hi, you
In
too.
terms of what you mentioned about geographic demographics and activity, do you find, because most of my, I'm old, most of my stuff is done through Facebook. I'm not even that good at IG, so my IG is lacking versus my Facebook. First question is, do you find one or the other more useful? And what about those tools on Facebook that says, boost this, we will target a market for you? Do you find that those work? Is it a waste of money? Or it's just,
No,
or you know what
these
I
are
mean?
great
Like,
questions. Yeah. You know what I'm gonna do, Echo? I'm gonna put a pin in both of those because I think they're actually incorporated in this presentation. But if I don't answer your questions, please reflag them for me because I don't want to skip over them.
thank
It's
you.
actually the perfect question to bring us into our sort of like our platform conversation, the Facebook versus Instagram versus what the heck else is out there. So where is our target audience, right? We want to think about places where the folks we're trying to reach are most active. That can be tough, especially if we have a broad target audience. So I definitely recognize that. When we think about social media as a sort of like web, I will just say like 2024 feels like it was like 17 years ago in social media years. It's something like dog years, I think, but it moves even faster in terms of technology and social media. It feels like Twitter is essentially obsolete for a lot of those who of us who are doing mission driven work, or X, I guess now it is. Meta has certainly changed a lot too. And I would say like TikTok, right? It's precarious at best. Snapchat, is only going to appeal to certain demographics, I would imagine. There's certainly a lot of other platforms out there. I'm just mentioning a couple of them. I would ask if folks wouldn't mind just in terms of like engagement to drop in the chat, make sure you're sort of choose the everybody option in the chat so folks can see. Make a note of not where you are using social media on a personal basis, but if you do have active accounts, whether they're nonprofit, for profit, whatever it might be, make a note of maybe where you are active, where you have pages that exist. I'd love to hear about what you're using. I know there's new stuff out there. There's Blue Sky. There's all kinds of stuff, right? So, we're going to talk today in the research that I did leading up to this conversation today. I chose the platforms that are still considered the most high use. Generally speaking, I wouldn't necessarily recommend that you. I mean, you certainly can snapshot. Like I said, I'll share slides, but this data is moving so fast. This is really current data, and I think it's probably going to be out of date so quickly. But the reason I say that is because I would urge you to do your own research in addition. This is certainly one snapshot of like a broad strokes of kind of like these are by the nonprofit use. Okay, just to put a note, this is the nonprofits that are using. Facebook is the highest, with Instagram, Twitter, and X, even though I just said it's feeling more obsolete, and then YouTube and LinkedIn. Now, could you make the argument that this should be somewhat in different orders? I think maybe we could make that argument, meaning LinkedIn seems to be a space where we want to access professional information. But to Echo's point earlier, Facebook still reigns supreme, at least as of the moment. Again, this is overall, right? So we're not talking about very specific demographics, right? But I, I'm not going to tell you. And then here again is by age range, right? And you can see it's sort of all over the place. If the colors are confusing, again, I'll send this out after so that you can take a closer look if it's interesting to you. But again, this isn't by nonprofit, it's by age range, right? You can see here at the bottom those ranges. So again, you need to do your own research because I can't sit here and tell you like you guys need to open a Blue Sky account and cancel your X account and get busy on LinkedIn. Well, that might be true, but it might not be good advice for you depending on who you're trying to reach and what you're trying to share. So, really this was just a way of getting, I think, our wheels turning. I would say again, do your own research. Don't spend days and hours and weeks doing it. Just, take a little look, do a Google search. This is who I'm hoping to reach. This is where I'm at. And just try to follow your instincts on what you learn. I would give you this one piece of advice on platforms. Do not put all your eggs in one basket. That basket just might be owned by a corrupt billionaire who you may decide to part ways with at some point. Um, or lots of other things could happen, right? It could crash. There's lots of things that could happen. So I would just urge you that, like, regardless of the reasons that you have, maybe consider having at least two platforms. At a minimum, right? I also would urge you not to try to put your eggs in every basket. Because that will very quickly become more than a full-time job. And I'm gonna guess most of us don't have the kind of resources to allocate to that. So maybe you hone in on two to start, or maybe three at the most. And then we'll talk about how we kind of pivot as things change in a little bit.
And
So,
in the chat, Julie, we were
oh
mostly
yes, thank
seeing
you.
Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn. I saw a couple Blue Sky Discord, and I did also,
Oh,
as to your
Discord.
point, see a mention about the safety of some of those platforms for some, especially for certain groups of people. So
Yeah.
well thought.
Okay, this is really helpful. Thank you. Please continue to add, like, if there's anything contextual that would be interesting, whether something you've experienced yourself, like at your organization or group, or just contextual to kind of like where we're accessing social media information. I would love to take a look at that in more depth later on. Thank you, Helen. That's super helpful. Okay, so we're gonna jump from we've talked about goals, we've talked about audience, we've talked about platforms a little bit, and we're going to jump right into content. Um, it's great to have a page anywhere, right, that you choose is appropriate for you. But if you don't have content, you're really just kind of like what I call a lurker. Um, because you're just there, like sort of observing, which can have value. Don't get me wrong. We'll talk about that in a bit, but you're really not actively engaging. So creating content is going to be our next sort of adventure together. So we're looking to design engaging, relevant, thoughtful, and diverse format content. We'll talk about that. I'll explain what that means. But ultimately, I thought I would put this silly little pink octopus up because frankly, this is how I feel many days. It's like us with like 100 different devices trying to like comment, respond to comments and like something and like um trying not to lose our minds, keeping up with trends and tagging our partners and, monitoring spam and all kinds of craziness, right? So again, it's just a way of acknowledging, like, first of all, we can have a little bit of fun with this. And also, second of all, it's a lot. It's a lot. There's a lot going on and it can move fast. It can be kind of crazy. So with our pink octopus in mind, I wanted to talk about diversifying types of content that we create first. Think about what stops you personally. You're a consumer too, right? So what stops you in your tracks as you're using social media? It doesn't mean that that's the same as all of our audiences, right? But it can be useful, I think, to think what is stopping our scroll. Now I'll also pause to acknowledge what stops your scroll content might be coming from someone with like a very hearty budget. So I don't necessarily want to suggest we can always replicate those ideas, but it definitely can help us to draw inspiration. It can help us just make a mental note, like put ourselves back in that like consumer seat for a minute and say, oh, that caught my eye. So make a note of it, take a screenshot, click on the save button if you use Instagram or whatever. Sometimes I'll be guilty of like sending myself inbox messages. Our team actually has like a little group on Instagram. It's like a private DM group, and we just call it content ideas. And anytime we see something that like catches our eye, we just drop it in there so that we can come back and look at it later. So there's lots of ways you can manage that to kind of flag it for yourself. If you close that window, you will never find that thing again unless you have a much better memory than me. Because it just goes so fast. So I recommend just figuring out what works best for you and for your teams. Um, thinking about diverse content. So there's all different things. I'm only going to mention a few today, but there's static content like text and still graphics and images. It's kind of the OG of content, right? There's educational content like articles and infographics, which can be really cool for, especially for sharing mission stuff, impact statements, that kind of thing. You can have animated content, which can be very fun, videos, skits, reels, etc., etc. We can have interactive content, kind of like our poll earlier, can be fun for some. It can be polls, quizzes, what have you, but there's fun ways that you can set things up to really prompt people to engage. And then there's stories, which are still relatively new to the market, where you can share something that doesn't sort of live on your feed. There's also all kinds of other things. There's memes, there's testimonials, there's live streaming, there's the BTS. Does everyone know what that is? It's like your behind the scenes. People love the younger content creators, much younger than me, love this BTS. Behind the scenes, it kind of gives people like a quote unquote peek into like your content creation, or your day to day. There's carousels, there's ads and boosted posts, like Echo said. There's so much that we can do. So together, the hope is that we kind of weave this beautiful rainbow that's very appealing, and brings in lots of different types of users. Do you need to use all of these things? Absolutely not. That would be overwhelming. It would be exhausting. Play around with it, have fun with it, see what works for you. We're going to talk more about kind of like the nuance of content creation and the energy that goes into that in a little bit. But I do recommend that while you definitely don't need to use everything, I recommend mixing it up to some degree. The other thing that like we find that has super good engagement is photos of real people. Like I think sometimes we can be a little bit self-conscious actually. I'll call actually Echo out because she was brave enough to ask the first question out loud. But Echo and her sister Bree are really tremendous at sort of removing that kind of like self-consciousness out of their content creation, and they're constantly making videos, taking selfies, going live, and I think it like it draws people into their content. And I think when you don't get in your own way, I guess is what I'm saying. I think it's really smart to do that. It feels very engaging. It feels like the next best thing to like being together sometimes, and it personalizes your work. I think that's something that I definitely admire when I see it. I would say some of us have work that we do that either doesn't lend itself because of confidentiality or other factors to like posting like the people we serve or like real faces. But maybe you can get creative and sort of exploit your colleagues, and if they're willing, and maybe even some board members or other partners, as well as like public events are great spaces to as well to create like opportunities to share real faces, because that always has a huge spike in engagement. And then be thinking too about what is the purpose of that content. So some of the things to keep in mind is promotion, right? You have something you want folks to sign up for, whether it's purchasing tickets for an event, whether it's registration is open for your programming, etc. You may be looking to educate on something topical, to the work you're doing. You might be looking to inspire your followers, or you might be looking to entertain. This is just a few of the purposes that exist. But ultimately, I think we want our content to stick with folks. So knowing your brand like the back of your hand really helps. I would tell you when you're thinking about content creation, and by this I mean original content, not content that you're sharing, which has a huge value as well. People create content to be shared. So I love when folks share Casa's content. It makes me so happy. Or even when Worcester's, any of the groups that I work with, makes me so happy. So know you can like share content that aligns with you, and that can be very valuable. But when I talk about creating original content, know your brand. know it well, know your RBG colors in your brand, know your fonts. If you are not part of like a larger organization like national or whatever it might be, create a little brand guide for yourself or for anyone else who touches your content or your social media and make sure you follow it like a Bible. You need to stick with that brand guide. If you're part of like a larger organization or national or whatever, you likely already have that. And you really it's pretty firm. Or if you're at a university or anything like that. But otherwise, create yourself a little cheat sheet, even from some of those brand guides are like multi-page overwhelming. So just take snapshots from it. What are the things that you're going to be using on a daily or weekly basis and know them? People should recognize your content at a glance. Even when they're scrolling fast, they should say, I know for sure that is whoever you're working with, even if they don't stop to consume it entirely or process what read your caption or whatever, they should know, oh, I just stumbled upon something Casa related based on your integrity of your brand. So, in a moment, we're going to into a little bit of metrics, but I'm looking at the time. We're about halfway through, and I wanted to just take a breath. I'm going to take a drink of my seltzer and see, does anyone have a burning question? Again, we have more content that might answer some things, but I've been moving fast and I just want to pause.
Is there a particular kind of content that you think is more successful, or it's kind of based on your your population, your demographic, what you're aiming for, or is there we obviously if we're new to this and we can't do it all, where do you suggest we focus on for content in one or two of those areas?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I also see, Jeff, that you have your hand up as well. I think that so I'm drawn to animations, to movement. Me personally, it can be a tiny bit more work than having static content, but honestly, not a ton more. And it doesn't have to be like a full video. If there's movement, I think it helps catch my eye more so. So it could just be like a GIF or like a couple seconds of movement and animation built into your graphic. I would personally recommend that because that can fall under lots of different content styles. But I think it just stands out that much more than static graphics. Static graphics can be great. You can pump them out. There's definitely a place for them. But I think for me, movement is really, really helpful. Jeff, hi.
Oh, so question was around brand voice. As you're developing your content, what are the elements of brand voice? You started to go down the list of RGB colors. Maybe you could give a description of what that is and what the other elements of uh, brand voice would be.
Yeah, so I would recommend that if you're like a smaller or newer or more grassroots group and you don't have like brand guidelines to lean on, obviously, you would look to your kind of like logo or your primary graphics to get those RBG colors. There are platforms online. I am by no means a marketing expert per se, but you can use like free resources online to identify what those colors are that are in your I'll use Casa like I have been all day as an example, but we have basically three colors that we use. There's like a navy, there's like a cherry red, and then there's white. Those are our three colors. We didn't pick them per se. They're part of national guidelines, but there's lots of guidelines around sort of like what color should. And by the way, when I say red or navy, right, that's like a million colors. So make sure you know exactly, like if you Google RBG colors, you should be able to come up with there's a color code that goes with every single color and it's very specific to your exact color. Keeping in mind that like depending on the screen you're using, that color could look a little different. So make sure it's like your original graphic or logo. And then just make note of those so that every time you replicate them, you're not like trying to eyeball it and be like, this looks really close to my colors that you can punch it in when you're creating designs. And we'll talk a little bit more about tools for that in a little bit. And same for fonts. I recommend that you don't use fonts that are like very rare unless you intend to download them on every machine you use. Otherwise, try to access fonts that are that are less hard to come by. And I would also recommend, we're going to talk more about this in a little bit. We're going to talk about tips and tools toward the end, but be thinking about accessibility because there are certain color combinations that just don't pop together if you put certain text colors on certain backgrounds. Really challenging. I hope, Helen, you don't mind that I use One Worcester as an example. We have a really, I think, compelling logo, but we also recognize that certain ways it's used, like with transparency and stuff like that, that it looks like essentially like white, it's hands, like helping hands, and it looks like white hands. And what we didn't want to do was lean into like this like white saviorism of like, look at these white, it was just a color, like it was just a neutral color, right, that was used, but we don't want it to show up on different backgrounds as like these white hands coming in, right? Like that's not One Worcester's vibe at all. So that was something that we needed to like rethink, right? Okay, what are ways we can continue to use that logo that's recognizable and, is thoughtful and beautiful and but make it functional and not give it these kinds of like accidental connotations, right? So it's okay that that evolves over time, but just try to hone in on. I would recommend having one primary font and one secondary font. It doesn't mean you can never use other fonts. There's certainly fonts that can complement them. And I would recommend and make sure people can read them. They want to be a little bit fun and fancy, but not like so fun and fancy that they're like people are like squinting, to make it out. And then I would recommend having one or two primary colors and then maybe a third or fourth secondary colors at the most. Again, doesn't mean you can't use other colors for special events or for other things, but your brand, that's kind of what I'm thinking of when I talk about brand integrity. So I'm going to come back to brand when we talk about some tips and tricks. But Helen, were there other questions?
I was just looking at the chat, and again, we might not, in the interest of time, get into it now. Again, follow-up survey to come about a part two. But one was a question about using AI generated images, and the other a question about working in partnership with other people's brand kits.
Beautiful. Okay, we're going to talk about that when we get to tips and tools. And like I said, if we don't answer the questions you have, please flag them when we get to that point. Um, so now we're going to jump into metrics. I'm not going to spend a ton of time here because I also don't want you to exhaust yourself thinking about metrics and trying to track things. The metrics you track will depend on your goals. If you try to track everything, you're going to lose your mind. Don't try to bite it all off. But if you track nothing, on the other hand, you're going to have a really hard time understanding A, where you began and show that growth, and B, what is working and what isn't working. So you're just going to end up spinning your wheels, right? So I chose this graphic intentionally because I think sometimes we can be guilty of like throwing everything into a wall and seeing what sticks, and eventually something will stick. This is true, right? But you might waste a heck of a lot of energy and time trying to figure that out and just throwing until we figure that out. So I would just say, don't make that your whole strategy, throwing everything against the wall. Be thoughtful, definitely be nimble, be willing to pivot and say, this isn't working, no big deal, let it go. But definitely metrics can be your friend in that way. Again, we're just going to sort of touch on this very briefly. It could be a whole session and then some. So we're not going to dig in deep, but we're just going to talk about a few types of metrics. We talked about your audience, your platforms, and your content. So, think about measurable data that complements those things. And try to take a baseline of where you're starting. Even if you've inherited pages or you're sort of like resuming pages, maybe they've been like a little bit quiet for a while, but you're going to dig back into them. Take a note, whether you put it in a spreadsheet or whether you just take a screenshot and save it somewhere safe that you can find it again later. But give yourself the gift of showing yourself where you started, because then you can really celebrate your growth. Think about the reach, so where and who. Think about engagement, likes, comments, and shares that would include. Think about your posts, like frequency, timing, and format of them, and then conversions. So for some people, there might be the pace and cost, which I know Echo touched on earlier, like ads and boosted things. So conversions can be a little bit more specific to certain types of goals, but I did include them because I think that they can be important. So again, this is a lot to take in. I recognize that, but just it's a way of saying the who, what, where, etc. Now we can say we already have those things. So let's see what's working and what isn't, where we need to invest more time, more energy, or more money. So, any actually, I'm hesitant to open it up because there's gonna be a million questions about metrics, and frankly, I don't want to sit here for too long. I'm happy to circle back later on it, but I'm gonna keep moving just in the interest of time. Again, just like we are today, I want metrics to be part of your thought process, part of your strategy building, part of the way you evaluate yourself, but don't let it consume you. Don't let it drag you down. Okay. We're going to talk about evolution next because, as we said earlier, things move very quickly. And so we need to be continually assessing and reassessing what's working and what isn't. Um, so, I know that this kind of word got thrown around a lot, maybe got a little stale over COVID, and if you did your experience anything like mine, but nimble really is the name of the game when it comes to social media. The reason being that it's moving. So you could have the perfect strategy. And if you implemented that perfect strategy in 6 months or a year, it would now be imperfect, right? So that's one piece of it. And another thing is that like you're going to be using what you're learning to help guide you. So don't get too like stuck in sort of we must do this because we invested in it and we decided it was going to be perfect and best. And if it's not working, don't be afraid to change directions. I just put this here as a little silly, reminder that technology and social media are moving fast. And if we try to keep up with it, we're going to burn ourselves up out, trying to keep up. So just sort of be comfortable making change, be comfortable responding to what we hear and what we learn. Don't get too hung up in like, but I love Facebook. Well, okay, if your audience doesn't, sorry, you're gonna have to learn Instagram or whatever. Like I'm just using those as examples, right? But just be open to the evolution piece of it. Ask yourself what is working really well and ask yourself what needs to be adapted. Um, the only thing constant is change. So again, your strategy has to be moving. It has to be evolving with us. So the fun of that can be if you're someone who doesn't like change, social media won't be very fun for you, candidly. But if you're okay with kind of change and responding to what's out there, it can be super, super fun because you just never really get stuck in a rut. You never really feel like bored with it. So that's what I would recommend in terms of evolution and the way we sort of respond to the constant change out there. Um, Now we're getting into what I think might be a really fun part of it, and that is our tools and our tips. So we're going to talk about some that I want to share with you, but really I want to hear about what your tools and tips are too, because these are certainly just scratching the surfaces. So I'll try to get some juices flowing here in our conversation, but I'm going to be asking for suggestions, and as they come to you, please just throw them right in the chat. They may end up being a topic that we can spend a little bit more time on, or that someone else can glean some help from. So when I think about working smarter, not harder, I found this and I thought, like, this guy's gonna be here all day. He's trying to blow up this tire with like a bicycle tire pump, right? So don't exhaust yourself. Work smarter. Use the tools and tips that are out there. Some folks touched on AI and partnerships and stuff. So now we're gonna get into some of those things. So definitely access sort of like platforms and software that are out there. Some are free, some are low cost. Um, the internet is a big, big, wild and wonderful place, sometimes wonderful place. And it can really help you to create inspiration or content or help edit captions or create captions, scheduling out posts for the future, tracking analytics like we just talked about, and much, much more. I am not a tech person naturally, so like I said, I'm eager to learn from you. But here are a few things that I wanted to share just to get our wheels turning. Graphic design platforms, my personal favorite. We are currently using, right now, you are looking at a Canva design. Canva is amazing. It's very versatile. There's a free version for nonprofit accounts. It is amazing. There's so much functionality to it. Another thing is scheduling platforms. So when we think about social media management, I've used Hootsuite in the past, but there's tons of competitors on the market, and I'd love to hear if you don't mind putting in the chat sort of what you use. Oh, Helen, yes, please.
Yeah, Rose Wine just mentioned later.com, and oh, another later.com
Ooh,
mention, a couple of those. Wow. So we've got a few of those in the chat
I'm
right now.
checking
That's what I'm
that out.
seeing. I
Okay.
also see Gamma AI in reference to something else. But yeah, we're
Okay.
seeing
Ooh, I
Hootsuite,
have to check that
THT,
out.
Canva, CapCut, Procreate. But
Cool.
later, I will be looking into that as well.
Okay. Me too. Okay, this is exciting. This is exactly why I'm learning too fast.
MetaSuite.
Okay. Oh yeah, Meta actually has a pretty good scheduler if you're using Meta primarily or exclusively. Um Grammar and spelling check. Don't spend too much time copy editing yourself. Something as easy as a free Grammarly you can download and keep on your machine. It can help you catch typos in programs where there's no spell check built in, including sometimes Canva. Um, Another thing is content calendars. So I would really urge you to lean on a content calendar, even if you create it as you go. Like what I mean is you don't have to sit down January 1st and map out your whole year, but if you can make notes as you go along throughout this year, for instance, we're still pretty early in the year, you make notes of major events or major milestones, things you like to acknowledge or celebrate for your content. Some of those things are going to be annual and predictable and they're going to repeat. So why don't you create one this year if you don't already have a template for that? And then when you go back January 1st of next year, you'll have something there to start from. And you can every year after year, you can build it out, but you're not starting from scratch every year. I could schedule out content for Mother's Day in 2030 if I wanted to, right? Like that's just how the calendar works. So some of these things you can save yourself time and like kind of hustling to get something. Oh my gosh, tomorrow is whatever, this really important day for the work we do, or something we really wanted to acknowledge. Well, if that was predictable, you could schedule that a month ahead or however long ahead and not be like that happens to fall on a weekend or a day when you're just hectic or oh my gosh, maybe you got sick. So then you can give yourself, I call those, my team can confirm, I call those a gift to future Julie. When I do something for myself, I'm like, oh, you know what? I know I'm gonna need to do this eventually, so I'm just gonna do it right now while it's on my mind and while I have 30 seconds or whatever, 5 minutes. And then later, future Julie is like scrambling to do the thing, and they're like, oh, I did it already. What a gift. So you might be thinking about like volunteer appreciation month for your organization. You might be thinking about things that align with sort of the work that you're doing, whether it's an awareness day or month or any other major initiatives or campaigns that you know are going to be annual. Um, Schedule them out, make a content calendar. Use, listen, we could talk all day about AI. That's not what we're going to do because it's just like a massive topic right now. But I will say there's obviously tons of benefits. There's obviously a ton of pitfalls. Let's just say for caption creation specifically, I strongly recommend that you drop your thoughts into like something as simple as a chat GPT and let it spit it out for you, whether it's like a word count, whether it's just like a copy editing, grammar check, whatever it might be. Whether it's like, I want to post this 5 times in the next month, but I don't want to say the exact same thing. Drop it in there and say, show me 7 different ways to say this. Obviously, I'm going to put the asterisk disclaimer like, check anything you use rely on AI to do not overly rely on it. But definitely let it help you, definitely lean on it to help support, especially when you're like a brain block at 7 p.m. I've been working on this all day. I've lost all of my brain power. Just drop it in there. There's no shame in it. It's still your work, it's still your thoughts, and you're just, you're using it as a tool to help you. Um, Accessibility checker. We talked about this a little earlier with brand. Make sure that you are considering accessibility. This has to do with color contrast and fonts, like we talked about before. It also, if you think about like, you might be on like, maybe you have like a big monitor in front of you that you use to create content on Canva. I'm just saying, for example. Well, will that content be consumed on someone's mobile device, which is a fraction of the size. So just make sure you're checking those kinds of things. I recommend that for everything, not just social media, anything visual you create. Think about what that looks like. Even the most like quote unquote fun content or colors can be a real accessibility challenge. So I wanted to just note, I when I was researching for today, I ran upon this statistic. Over 90% of social media users globally are consuming social media on their mobile phone. So just to give you a sense of like how you don't want to put like 100 words in that graphic. Use, combine your caption and your graphic, whatever you need to do, but like it's just not accessible if you put too many words or you get too busy with graphics and colors and stuff like that. So just be thinking about that and again, what you're noticing as you're consuming too. Helen, did you have?
Quick question in the chat related to this. Are there programs that might help with checking content for
Yes.
accessibility?
There's a bunch of them. I actually meant to circle back and make a list of them for folks today, but I had forgotten to finish my research. There's a ton that are free.
And
And
it
people
looks
might
like
be, okay, are
Emily's
people
saying
suggesting?
that Canva has a great accessibility tool that checks content, and
It does. And
subtitles
when
for
it
the deaf as well.
Yes. Oh, thank you. That's excellent. And there's also if you just Google accessibility checkers for graphics or color, whatever that there might be, there's a lot of free tools out there that you can like either upload images into or that can like make recommendations. So it's really, really cool technology. So I recommend that. I recommend link. Oh, that's not, we want to work smarter, not harder. I recommend link shorteners as well, particularly for captions. So what does that mean? Use things like Bitly, Owly, Tiny URL. There's a million of them, I'm sure. Those are a few that I know of. Don't use up your sort of like word count in your caption or like all these characters, putting this long, long web link. Use shorteners. Um, and use video editors. Again, this is personal preference. There's lots of tools out there. Some of them are going to be like mobile apps, and that's, by the way, totally fine and great. And some might be desktop. Again, some are free, some are not, depending on how sophisticated you want to get. I recommend dabbling in the free ones until you get a sense of what you're actually going to use on a regular basis. But I'd love to hear what other things folks are using for video editing. I know there's just like basic ones like iMovie, but there are lots of other you can edit right in Instagram, of course, in Reels, but there's lots of other things.
CapCut is good for video editing from a
Ooh,
few
thank
people.
you. Okay, exciting. Okay, so we're gonna go right into tips. Please keep dropping your tools in the chat, but this is like a complimentary topic, so I'm gonna go right into tips. And so why do I have this here? Um, what happens in Vegas might stay in Vegas, but what you put on the internet is forever. You can go in and delete it, but guess what? Someone might have taken a screenshot already. So I just say this as a cautionary tale to folks. Think twice, maybe even three times, especially if it's particularly controversial or spicy, before you hit post. What I would recommend strongly is do not use your business or organizational platforms to feed your own impulses. If you want to go a little crazy on your personal pages, that's between you and your followers or your goals. But on the organizational or business pages that we're talking about today, especially if you have had a couple glasses of wine or whatever else you used to enjoy yourself, save that post for tomorrow. If your emotions are running high on a topic or there's something really challenging you need to address as an organization, please tag someone else in, a trusted peer or colleague or board member. I know a lot of us are running lean teams, so you may not have like a group to run this off of per se. So ask someone that you trust that will be honest with you, and make sure that you are thoughtful about. I'm not talking about like posting a cute graphic. I'm talking about stuff that might be a little bit deeper or more sensitive, especially in our current climate. I think we just need to be really cautious that we're being thoughtful about our brands and thoughtful about what we put out there. I'm certainly not one that will ever just, those of you who know me know this. I will never discourage you from like avoiding something that might be not a popular thing, right? That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking something that might someday down the line you're like, ooh, that was not in good taste. Or gosh, I wish I had had one more person read that over before I posted, right? That's what I'm talking about. That's tip number one. And then again, there's lots, this could go on for hours and hours. So instead, we're just gonna use the chat, and I'm gonna use this as just again a little conversation starter, a few tips. We talked about it earlier very briefly at the beginning. Your brand is not your organization's brand. Do not mix them up. Um, Sometimes, especially if you're a founder or you're, founding director, or you're just living and breathing the work you do, all these things can be true, but don't conflate or confuse those things. There is intersection. I'm not suggesting that there's not. I'm not suggesting you remove personality from your organization or business content. Not at all. Earlier I said, go live, take selfies. That's all still true, right? But just be careful that your voice and your organization's voice and brand are not the same. Approach them as two separate things. Interactions with social media should be similar in terms of keeping them separate. I'm going to use the example because it's just topical right now, that your personal politics and your organizations or businesses politics, or lack thereof, right? May be different. So we need to be cautious that we are not projecting our personal. Now, by the way, you have every right to, and you should continue to have opinions personally, right? I'm not suggesting that, but don't use your professional spaces to sort of like, as an extension of that, right? We need to stay mission focused, and we need to be super clear about what is our mission stance on certain things, and where our voice lies in that, and not let the distractions of the world around us kind of like distract from that, right? Again, that could be a whole conversation. So it's just a little bit of we're just dipping our toe in it. Another thing that can be really tricky, especially for those of us that are doing important work in the community, is don't exploit those we serve. Be cautious to, you can tell your story. A lot of folks are empowered by telling their stories, but just make sure that we're very cautious that we're never exploiting those we serve. Edit, and edit again. There just, it can be very distracting if there's a lot of glaring typos or grammatical mistakes. You don't want to be super mechanical and robotic, obviously, but you do need to give it some attention, because I think it is a reflection of your organization and how professional and thoughtful it is. On the other hand, authenticity will always rule over perfection. So yes, you want to edit, and yes, you want to be cautious, but also don't massage these things to death. I think authenticity shines through. I think being human, being relatable is really compelling. It's really approachable. And you know what? We make mistakes. Yes, we talked about the kind of more glaring ones that we want to be cautious of, but um, if you find a typo like a week later, oh, I posted this and there was like a typo in it, move on. Don't take it down and repost it, especially if it's getting good engagement. Move on. People aren't checking our content as closely as we are, so just don't consume yourself with like the perfection piece of it. The other thing is consistency in your posting and your engagement is much more important than the type of content like we talked about earlier, or like having a lot of flair. It's more important to be engaged on a regular basis for algorithm purposes than having like, oh, I spent like 4 hours making this beautiful reel and it got 100 views. Like, that's a real bummer. Um, so just kind of like try to find that balance, right? It doesn't mean you can't experiment and have some fun, but definitely don't let the perfection get in the way of the good, right? As they say, I can be guilty of this too. I'm a type A gal. But just stay consistent and stay relevant. That's really important. We talked about it a little bit before, we touched on it, but like there's nothing new under the sun, and there's lots of great work being done out there. So if it aligns with the work you're doing, and people created content again with the intention of it being shared far and wide, share it. Everything you share doesn't have to be or original, as long as you're giving credit. You're not downloading their content and then re-uploading it as your own. You're sharing it from their platform. So you're giving their work and their their platform a nod, and you're also giving yourself a gift of having more content and sharing more regularly. And it takes a literal second. You might want to add your own thoughts, or you might just hit share. Great. That's a win-win, baby. It's a great way to partner with folks. Another thing that I think
Julia,
some,
I have a quick question just
yeah,
regarding the recycle and repost. Do you think it gets more visibility to hit share and write something or more impact on your thing than to download that content, reshare it, and then tag that page so it looks like it's coming from your page, but you're still giving a nod to the page or the
it would,
creator
yeah,
where it
that's a
came from?
great
Is there a
question.
difference in?
There is, so I would be cautious about the second one. I would really be cautious about like downloading and posting, even if you're tagging the other group. If it were my content, like I don't mean mine personally, but like the organization I'm working with, I would far prefer that someone share my content. It creates like it helps you keep the integrity of what the intention was behind it. If you don't feel comfortable with sharing the original content, you might want to ask yourself, is it something that I actually do want to share? You know what I mean? Like if there was a caption or something that you were like, might just not be your thing to share. But I would 9 times out of 10, there's definitely exceptions out there, like anything, but I would definitely recommend the share over the download and repost version. However, someone did mention earlier, this is a great space for partnerships too. I'll give you an example back in human trafficking awareness week, and then it culminated in a day. We partnered for the second time this year with several organizations, the YW, Abby's House, and then this year we added Pathways for Change. And if someone's on that knows who it is, tell me. I think Alyssa maybe might be here. I know I'm forgetting someone important. But we created the content together. Everyone didn't create their own content. We created content once and then we shared it all. We made sure that our logos and our brands were all reflected with integrity. And then we were able to like get exponential views and engagement because we each committed to sharing 6 different organizations, and we did tag one another. So that's kind of like an exception echo, maybe in sorts, although it was done proactively and not reactively, but we created it with the collective agreement. We will all tag each other. So it wasn't CASA's content that 5 organizations shared, but it was like content that had all of our logos on it. And that's a way you can do a really thoughtful partnership. It did not take us weeks and hours and whatever. It was like, hey, you guys want to do this together? Yep, we sure do. Okay, great. What works for you? What doesn't? Great. Oops, again, I did that. Um, so that's a great space for partnerships too, to get exponential mileage. Listen and respond. I also want to acknowledge, I just noticed that it's a little past the hour. I can hang a bit, but if other folks need to drop, I totally, totally, totally get it. I apologize for running over. I had a feeling this might be
No, you're
ambitious.
fine. And we
Okay.
will continue because I know some people don't have to be anywhere, but if you do, just know, thank you so much for being here today. And I'll be sending out a follow-up email with all relevant information that was listed here today, some of these resources that other people are putting in the chat as well. And Julie mentioned she's happy to send out the slides. So I'll send that to the group as well as event information for the future. So thank you so much if you have to hop off. And if you're able to stay on, stick with us for a few more minutes.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So I would say like listening and responding is probably one of the most frequently overlooked items. If you're just posting, but you're not interacting with other groups, then you're kind of like missing an opportunity for engagement. It's a way to keep your brand relevant and your handle out there without creating organic content, whether that's just going through and liking a bunch of content that you feel is in alignment or that you really are enjoying or appreciating, whether it's putting a comment, congratulating someone, or whatever it might be. Set aside some time to really listen and respond and interact. Otherwise, I think it's just a missed opportunity. We want people to engage with our content, so it's also a way of kind of like creating that two-way street, right? And protect your brand. Last time I gave a presentation on this topic, it was different content, but someone brought up this really important point. And so I wanted to make sure I built it in. How do we respond to like negative comments, or occasionally we'll encounter like I'll just say trolls, right? If you use an internet word. Um, you need to create a social media policy, even if it's just a paragraph or two. It doesn't need to be like something that's like super sophisticated, but a policy you can certainly, again, use technology. You don't have to start from scratch. Phone a friend, someone whose organization might be a little more established or whatever, and see if you could start with a draft or whatever. But have some checks and balances, have a policy to lean on so that you know when it's appropriate to hide comments, to delete things entirely, and maybe even you need to block sometimes accounts, right? Some of the work we do is not light, right? And so that might come with it some, I'm gonna say haters, although that's not exactly the word that I'm looking for. But some challenging space, right? I'm not looking for us to create an echo chamber. That's not necessarily what I'm suggesting. It's not for us to silence other perspectives, but I do want you to be thinking about protecting your brand, and that needs to be your absolute top priority. It doesn't mean that you can't ever respond to negative comments or engage with those things in appropriate ways. But just I would just recommend you put some thought into a policy so that when you do encounter that, you're not like, what will I do? You're just like, okay, yes, we thought about this. We're prepared for this. Again, get some other, feedback on it. Again, I have a Q&A slide, but you know what I'm gonna do first is, again, if you're still with us and if you still have time, I was gonna say you can use that same way that we did at the beginning to do the poll. If you scan this QR code, I think if we don't have time to do it, it's totally okay. But supposedly this is going to make like a fun word cloud of all of our tips and tricks. So if you have like a favorite platform, maybe you put it in the chat already, but you're willing to like play this fun experiment with us, or whatever it might be. But you can I think it will pop up all of your responses. It could be a tip, it could be a trick, it could be a platform, it could be a tool, it could be, a culmination of some of the things that were in the chat or something else you thought of. I'm not going to spend a lot of time here for obvious reasons, and I don't even know honestly if it's like working or not. What is this here? Oh, here we go. We got our
I'm
first
in.
one. Chat GPT. Yes. Um, in theory, this, and maybe I should have started with this, but I'll make a note for next time or if we had more time. But in theory, this will create a word cloud, which I'll then, of course, share with everybody afterwards. But everyone's ideas kind of like out here for us to all refer back to. Um, Kind of cool. Yeah, cross posting on multiple platforms, the same content. Thank you. Whoever said that, thank you. Do not create original content for Instagram and then go back to scratch for LinkedIn and back to scratch for Facebook and back to scratch for Blue Sky. No, 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 no. Recycle your own content. Yes, going live, making it personal, tagging people and sponsors. People love that. It gives them, it flags it for them. They may not encounter it otherwise. Definitely, definitely tagging folks. This is exactly what I hope this would be. And again, I do realize some folks had to leave and others maybe already accessed the chat, but ooh, okay, Gamma AI, creating simple and clear presentations. All of these are so exciting. I'm loving it. I'll use something like this earlier on next time so that we can, what I should have done is had the QR at the beginning and then we could have seen it explode as everyone was adding to it while we were talking, but I'll make that note for myself for next time. Thank
Well,
you to
and
everyone.
Julie, maybe I'll even
Yes.
go through our chat transcript and put some of those that weren't
Oh, that
previously
would be
in, so it'll
fun.
all be in the cloud for you. Yeah.
That would be super fun. And then when we share it out, everyone can see it in one place without having to access the chat. That's
Yeah.
really brilliant. Yeah. So like I said, I can hang out for a few minutes if we want to do a few questions and answer, but I also want to respect all of your time. And I do want to say, again, I want to say thank you to folks for being here. I wanted to say the other thing is, I'll skip this questions and answers. I would love to hear what resonated with you and what you'd like to discuss more, and maybe we can use a survey to support that as well. I would love you to be well. I am skimming over this only because I just wanted to say, really a thank you. I hope that if we're not already connected, that you'll connect with me on LinkedIn at a minimum. And I also wanted to make sure that I noted, I know Helen will send this like she said, but we do have a couple upcoming events. We have our March 26th social with Women in Development, and that's going to be at Courthouse Cafe. and that's in the evening on March 26th. We hope that you'll register for that. And we have our April 8th self-care and burnout. It's part two of a series, and that is preserving integrity. And it will be, I believe, in person at Worcester Housing Authority.
Yes, that'll
Did I
be
miss
from
any upcoming?
and then right before that, on the
Oh,
20th of March, we're also doing a grant writing seminar with Jody Swope. It'll be at 18 Chestnut Street in
oh yes.
collaboration with the Nonprofit Support Center. We'll provide breakfast. Feel free to, everything's on our website, so you can check that out to register. Um, and that one will go from 9 to 12 on the 20th.
Oh, thank you. I don't know how I missed that one. You put it right on my calendar too. But I really just appreciate being with all of you today in community and your sort of thoughtful engagement and your idea sharing and just making the time to be together. Again, I apologize for going over. I would be remiss if I didn't say check out CASA. I'm very proud of the work we're doing on social media, and it might hopefully help you draw some inspiration. But we'd also love to just engage with you in those spaces too. Like I said, I can pause for some Q&A if folks want to hang around, but otherwise, I totally understand if you got a jet. I'm gonna take off this sharing just so I can see more faces. I'm honestly not even sure.
And I will also just say, as mentioned previously, I'll be sending out an email that will have links to our events page for registration and other information you might
Ugh,
need. And on the topic of social media, feel free to tag One Worcester in anything. We'd love for One Worcester to be a platform specifically for nonprofits to share their information. We're hosting this webinar in part for ourselves. It's something we're going to up our personal social media use as well this year. So we'd love to help promote all of the work you're doing. And thank you
I
all
am
so much.
sorry that this was so rushed. I would love to structure it differently next time so that I can respond to the chat in real time. I appreciate you, Helen, for keeping folks
Course.
comments, in the
And there
comments.
will be a survey going out as well about what you'd like to deep dive into, because this is clearly a topic that everyone's very interested in. And we'll keep chatting as well. But before everyone logs off, I have to say a big thank you to Julie, our host today, for such a wonderful presentation, and for all of you for being such wonderful guests and participants. And the comments in the chat have been really, really great to read. So thank you all so much.
Thank you all.
So if you have anything you really want to ask Julie in the next few minutes, feel free to unmute
This-
yourself. This might be a little bit of unstructured time, but again, I know everyone has very busy schedules, so we'll leave it open for about maybe 5 or 10 minutes.
I'm finally able to go back to the chat and I'm loving seeing all the organizations that were here.
So many
I
good
just had
people in
one
the
quick
room
question,
today.
Julie, regarding engagement.
Yes.
Sometimes we make a post and it gets a lot of engagement, and we go, great, that's done. But what is the importance of actually going back and liking or commenting on all of those? Because sometimes that's overwhelming too when you have like the post really went off and you got 100 people saying, congratulations. Like, for engagement purposes, should you focus on going through, liking all of that, commenting on all of that? Like, you know what I mean? Like, how
It's a
important
great
is it? Or
question
was the
too.
initial engagement most
Yeah.
important?
I'm glad you made that point. That's a tricky one because I think like we all want to be in that position where we're getting that level of engagement, but it definitely can become like a whole project. So I would say maybe like depending on what the content is, I would say at a minimum, just go back and take a couple minutes to like or love or whatever each of the comments at a minimum, just so that people know that you like saw it. But if there's 100+ comments, I can understand it might be like impossible to respond to each one. The other thing you can do, and again, less personal, but it's better than nothing, is putting like I don't know, put like a stock response essentially, but basically like saying, like, thank you so much, appreciate your support or something like that. And then just like copy paste like 100 times so that you are acknowledging each comment. Because the other thing is it can bring your own content back to the algorithm just by like responding to a comment too. So I think it has that value. The other thing is you can be selective and say like, if someone just said like, congrats, maybe you just like that. But if someone said like, congrats, hope we can partner in the future or something like that. Maybe you like selectively choose like, okay, I'm going to respond to that because it was a little bit more like personal or substantive, what's the word I'm looking for? But
Substantiative.
yes. But that would be another possibility too, because that's such a judgment call. I mean, people who get these like hundreds of comments, that's their whole job, right? Like they're either the full-time job for an organization or a department even, or like these content creators or whatever, we have 100 other jobs. So I totally get that you have to be realistic about it too. Yeah. Oh, I'm so happy to see so many. I'm just like scanning the chat too. So exciting. It's awesome. Good. Good. Well, I will work on getting the slideshow, a link to the slideshow over to Helen so it can be included in the follow-up email. And yeah, I'm just like so energized by being with everyone today. Thank
I'm
you.
feeling the same way. You've put so many ideas in our heads, and it's nice to know everyone's in the same boat in some ways of still figuring it out as we go and learning from each other. Um, so I'll have everyone log off now just so you can go about your days and continue the good work. But once
Thanks,
again,
everyone.
big thank you, Julie. This was really, really educational and informative
Happy
and
to do it. Thank you.
inspiring.
Thank you. Awesome. I know, I think there was like,
Julie, I'll stay
oh
on
yeah,
here
are
for
we still
just one more
recording?
second.
Did you want to end recording too?
Yes.